All right, let's talk about Monster Hunter Wilds. So it's been a few days now since the game released, and it's been an interesting time to say the least. We have currently juxtaposed one of the best, most popular, and widest reaching Monster Hunter games ever, with a peak concurrent player count that puts it in the top 5 of all time on Steam, surpassing Lost Ark and just behind Counter-Strike 2. Yeah, Monster Hunter Wilds has been insanely popular. However, at the very same time, the game has also been inundated with negative Steam reviews, at its lowest point sitting at mostly negative with a 41% rating. Now, some of those complaints are about the various aspects of the game's content, but for the most part, these early criticisms have almost entirely centered around the game's poor performance, with Wilds having inconsistent frame rates and simply not running well for a wide swath of players. Now, this was something that we preemptively addressed in my review, saying that it was likely based on how many people had a poor experience with last month's demo. We were just hoping that maybe those would have got fixed for people by release. However, as we now know, those performance issues were clearly not addressed in time, and as such, there are a lot of people having a pretty bad time with the game, because if it runs like crap, it's gonna definitely impact your experience, and thus all of the negative Steam reviews that we now see. So, a few of these things I want to dive into here in today's video. Let's get right into it. Let us begin with the performance discussion. So simply put, the game is running like crap for a lot of players. And that, quite frankly, is unacceptable and something that Capcom needs to address. And they need to address it beyond putting out the tweet that says, "Have you tried updating your drivers, lol?" No, Capcom, come on, like seriously. Clearly, the issue runs a lot deeper than that, as evidenced by the existence of every other game out there that is seemingly running perfectly smooth for all of these people, even if they hadn't updated their drivers. You cannot just say a game's poor performance is due to not updating your drivers. Like, sure, updating your drivers is going to help some portion of those players to at least some degree, but you can't just say all of the game's performance issues are down to not updating your drivers. That's ridiculous. All that said, as I mentioned in my review, I played the game start to finish, and I had no issues personally that I could notice. If you asked me, I would tell you that my performance was great the entire time. And if there were any issues in my playthrough, it at least wasn't to a degree that was severe enough that I would have picked up on it, let alone that it impacted my enjoyment, because it didn't. Like I said, as far as I was concerned, my performance was great. And don't get me wrong, by the way, I am far from blind to performance issues. Quite the contrary. I've played plenty of games that ran like crap badly enough that I simply had to stop playing, mainly due to the fact that I am prone to motion sickness in games. So it doesn't often take much in terms of bad performance for me to want to stop playing the game. But like I said, that just wasn't the case here. My experience wasn't that bad. However, my subjective experience with any game, let alone with Wilds, shouldn't really matter to you, or at least it shouldn't be the end all. It's pretty clear that if you step outside my sample size of n equals 1 and how it was for me, there are clearly a large number of players out there who are having issues in performance that are bad enough that that has negatively impacted their experience, and that is what's most important, and that's what we should be focusing on, however good it was for me or otherwise. And fortunately, we have just some wonderful technical analysis channels out there, such as Digital Foundry, who dive into the nitty-gritty details of game optimization and performance. Now, pre-release of Wilds, they had videos out for the console versions of the game, of which they said it ran pretty poorly, or more poorly than they would have expected, considering the overall visual quality or lack thereof. And then on launch day, this past Friday, they finally released their analysis of the PC version, and it scored horribly, to be honest. So bad, in fact, that they straight up said they cannot recommend playing the PC version of the game if you have a mid to low end hardware. And even if you do have high end hardware, they said it's not running as smoothly as it should be, again, especially considering the game's overall lacking visual quality. And all of that is a pretty big indictment, because these are coming from people who dedicate their time to analyzing the performance of games. Here's some of the key takeaways from their breakdown that we saw. Firstly, they point out the fact that upon starting up the game, Capcom advises you by turning on frame generation, prompting you with this pop-up right at initial setup. And while this can provide most definitely a nice boost for frame rate if you are already having generally good performance, it's quite the inverse on the other end, because if you have average frame rate or one that is onto the lower end, frame gen can actually make your experience even worse, to the point where both Nvidia and AMD actually do not recommend using frame gen if you say say have sub 30 frames per second in the game that you're playing. Now, when they analyzed the game's performance on low-end hardware, testing using an RTX 4060, they said that the game had noticeably awful textures in many places, while also experiencing frequent stutters anytime they turned the camera, followed by textures not loading in properly and or fast enough, which created a whole lot of texture pop-in. And then when it came to high-end hardware, while the overall general frame rate was much higher and better, it still had its issues with textures that looked poor in a lot of places, and fairly consistent, inconsistent frame rate with frame time dips on a regular basis. Their overall analysis in terms of what was causing these issues, they say it's likely due to the game's method of streaming things into VRAM, along with poor streaming to the GPU and asset decompression. Now, for the thorough and full breakdown, I highly recommend checking out the Digital Foundry video yourself. Again, they've got ones for the console and the PC versions. Both of them are going to give you a pretty clear analysis as to how the game is performing in this release version. Either way, though, you don't even need a tech channel to tell you that performance is bad for many people, because you need look no further than the Steam reviews. As mentioned, they reached a low of 41%, putting the game at a mostly negative rating, with a bulk of those complaints being specifically performance related. Now, the game's score has since been climbing. It is now sitting at roughly 55%, giving it a mixed rating as of this recording, and I do suspect that it will keep climbing over time, eventually getting to 60, probably 70, maybe even as high as 75 or 80. But either way, it is pretty obvious, as of right now at least, that performance is quite bad for a lot of people. Now, in response to this uproar, you've seen a lot of conversation about the game's poor performance. Capcom did release a statement. They said, if you're experiencing any initial issues with Monster Hunter Wilds on Steam, please try updating your graphics driver, turning off compatibility mode, and then readjusting your setting. They then have a read more section. If you click through, it says giving you step-by-step instructions of how to update your graphics drivers, how to check for Windows updates, updating your DirectX, and then maybe even whitelisting the game on your antivirus. Come on, Capcom, like, are you serious? This isn't it, all right? Now, doing these things may very well improve performance for some, for sure, but it's pretty clear there is a broader, wider reaching issue here, especially thanks to the existence of places like Digital Foundry. They have analyzed the game and come to the conclusion that there are things beyond updating your graphics drivers or whitelisting the game on your freaking antivirus that are causing poor performance. And frankly, we all could have seen this coming, not only because of the pre-release test that a lot of people had poor performance, but also it's an RE Engine game, and that in and of itself might have led to what we have. If you recall, Dragon's Dogma 2, also on RE Engine, had similar problems with poor performance for a lot of people. A couple of other performance related notes I want to add. For anyone who hoped to play the game on Steam Deck, you should know that it is reportedly running at sub 20 frames per second on that platform. And there is the additional layer of potential performance issues that could be resulting from the fact that the game uses Denuvo DRM. And I was told there was also another layer of Capcom applied DRM on top of Denuvo. And those two things combined, but even just Denuvo itself, is pretty notorious for potentially impacting frame rate and performance in games when it is actively being used. So, again, my own personal experience aside, I did have fine performance, or again, at least it was not noticeably bad to the point that it impacted my experience or that I even recognized if it was occasionally dipping or if the frame timings or whatever the hell were choppy at points. Like, as far as I'm concerned, it ran perfectly fine. And I am not blind to performance issues. But that said, my own experience doesn't matter. And even if 50% of the players, the 50% that have voted the game positively on the Steam reviews, even if it's running flawlessly for them and there's literally no issues whatsoever, which probably isn't the case, but even if there's literally no issues for 50%, the fact that 50% are still having issues severe enough that they're complaining about it actively, that needs to be addressed more than just telling them to update their graphics drivers, okay? Capcom, please, for the love of God, I hope you do. Now, that in and of itself is a big enough issue, but beyond the performance conversation, other complaints have been cropping up. Now, much of this were mentioned in my review, but here are some of the biggest pain points that have clearly been bothering people post-launch as well. Multiplayer. While this is slightly better than it was in World, it is still obviously way too unnecessarily complicated and difficult. Now, this is mainly an issue while you are playing through the game's campaign, but the fact is, this is going to amount for most people's probably the better part of their playtime over the next couple of weeks, because it's not something you're finishing in 4 hours. It's going to take a while until people finish the campaign if you're playing at a regular pacing and you're not like a full-time gamer or streamer, right? A lot of people are going to have this just like shockingly bad multiplayer experience. It's just absolutely ridiculous to me the way they have designed this. Playing with friends should look like this. I should open a social menu, invite my friend to the party, and then we play the game. And then that's it. Until someone has to take a break or go to work or do whatever, we should just be able to continuously play with each other. But it's not that simple, unfortunately, for whatever reason. Instead, we have to contend with this process of jumping through all these different hoops, going from open lobbies to link parties to then sending out environmental link invites. And then also you have the separate layer of squads. Like, why is all of this necessary? Why do we have like 6 different named systems to navigate multiplayer and the social aspect of playing with other people, or just even let me invite my friend and then let me and my friend play with each other? That's it. It doesn't matter like our individual storyline progress or whatever. I don't give a crap if I could see them in the cutscenes of the story or not, because I'm skipping those cutscenes anyways, if I'm being perfectly honest. If you're familiar with my channel, that won't be as much of a shocker for you, but I just want to be able to easily play with friends. I'm pretty sure everyone universally just wants to be able to easily play with friends. It shouldn't be this difficult. I don't know why it's still so difficult. I hope eventually they come to their senses and streamline this, so it's just let me... Hello, friend, you want to play? Yes, we're in the party. Yay, we will continue to play until we decide that we no longer want to play with each other. That should be as complicated as playing with people ever gets. Speaking of complicated and difficult, let's talk about the game's difficulty. It's been brought up many times that the game is on the easier side, especially if you ask any Monster Hunter veterans and experts out there, people who have channels dedicated to the franchise. They will tell you that this is an easier game pretty much across the board. Now, with that said, during my personal playthrough, I didn't realize this. In fact, I just figured I had improved at the game. The fact that I played like a couple hundred hours of Monster Hunter World, I figured, I don't know, maybe I'm better now, or maybe because I swapped from the Great Sword to the Hammer, maybe the Hammer bros are just easier go at it, right? But all of the pros are saying the Wilds is evidently quite easy compared to prior games in the franchise, and that may very well be the case, whether or not I could recognize it or not. But then also, maybe that's part of the reason why this is the biggest Monster Hunter game ever. So I don't know. I mean, I guess it's a negative. People are definitely complaining about it. I guess on the plus side, they will likely add more challenging encounters to the end game as time goes on, and things do ramp up in difficulty as you push an end game and as you fight the tempered monsters and the higher star rating, however I don't know what they call those, but the higher star rating monsters that you fight as well. Like, it definitely does get more challenging. I mean, I thought I got better, but apparently I'm still bad and the game's easy. Whatever, it's frankly fine by me. One thing I do wish they made better is just how convoluted it is. So many of the game's systems and features are still quite complex, and Capcom rarely explains many of those systems, at least not to a satisfying degree, I would say, especially for newcomers. As a result, I think it could just be overwhelming for people new to Monster Hunter, figuring out like all of the different hidden mechanics, navigating the hundreds of items and resources and all the different consumables, etc. It's a lot to filter through. The game doesn't tell you much about it. This is partially a game design decision. I mean, you know, Dark Souls didn't tell you much. People figured it out and people love that game, but I think they could streamline or provide some more in-game resources for some of this stuff. They do a great job for parts of it, right? Like, they do explain the boss fights and their weaknesses and their different attacks and the different pieces and parts that for all the different gear that you can craft, what comes from where. That stuff is actually fairly well done, but there's still some more. I think they could do a better job of, at least in the tutorial, introducing you to some of these things. Whatever though. And then I just wanted to make an additional note here that Capcom has continued their tradition of having these like annoying and unnecessary microtransactions in their mainline games. Of particular note in Wilds is the fact that changing the look of your character is locked behind a paywall. Now again, this isn't new for Capcom. This isn't even new from Monster Hunter as far as I'm aware, but it's still, every other game lets you change the look of your character, unless you're just like some crazy pay to win cash grab title out there. Most other games let you just change the look of your character if you want to change the look of your character, but Capcom is just doing Capcom things with their DLC. I guess on the plus side, for the most part, none of this stuff is absolutely necessary. It's just annoying. That's about it. Now, in spite of all of those aforementioned issues, this game is doing phenomenally well, like record-breaking even. It is easily the most popular Monster Hunter game ever on PC, blowing the concurrent peaks of both World and Rise just totally out of the water. As of this recording, Wilds has now reached a peak of 1,384,608 concurrent players, which is huge. This places it as the 5th largest game ever on Steam, again, in terms of those concurrent players. That is larger than the peaks of Elden Ring, Cyberpunk, Dota 2, and Lost Ark. Now, you might be asking yourself, how can this be happening when this game has all these horrible performance issues on top of the game's systems and mechanics related problems that people are annoyed by? The multiplayer, how easy it is, the convolutedness, the dumb DLC. Well, I think it's pretty clear that aside from those facts, it's also just a pretty good game. As I outlined in my review, I think this is easily the best monster hunting game I've played. It's like World, which I loved, but it's bigger and better. I've just really enjoyed my time with Wilds, while also acknowledging that I was fortunate enough to not have severe performance issues that were bad enough to impact my experience. People who are certainly won't like it as much though, and that I understand, and that's why I get why it's at like 50% negative ratings. As a game, like the performance stuff aside, if they can fix performance and whatever, the game part of it, it's just a ton of fun. Like, I love it. The entire core loop of the game of finding and hunting monsters is super satisfying, rewarding, and as fun as ever. It's great from both a gameplay perspective, but also the spectacle of it all, with these like over-the-top huge bosses lurching and slamming all over the place, busting through barriers, smashing you into the dirt, let alone when you get other monsters coming in via turf wars. It's just like, it's a hell of a good time. It's really, really, really fun. Extra so now that I'm finally playing with friends post-release. I think probably one of the things I enjoy most about this series though is the sense of improvement that you get as you play as well, which works in a few different dimensions. First, there's the improvement with your weapon as you're learning all the attacks, the combos, the chains, the contextual abilities, and how all that flows together. Every weapon in Monster Hunter is kind of like its own class. They just all play very differently with unique mechanics and features. Then there's the monsters itself. They're all different and have their own challenge. Like a lot of other games that have boss fights, you gotta learn their moves, what animations lead into what attacks, and then how to avoid getting hit and striking when you can. And then Monster Hunter has also the additional layer of all the different tools with things like traps, your slinger ammo, all of the environmental stuff like rocks, ice, and trees, the bugs and the animals that do different things, the grapple points that let you get onto monsters' backs. All of these things combined, it's like the more you play, the more comfortable you get with how it all pieces together. And that growth and evolution just feels awesome, with your hunts getting more fluid and streamlined as you progress. I also love the Monster Hunter progression. It is simple but satisfying. You fight the monster, you take their parts, and then you make weapons and armor that look like those parts. It's just really cool to wear like basically the costume of the monster that you just hunted 5 times in a row. I like it. And then gear also has, it's got all its perks, armor resistances, their set bonuses, and then you'll pick and choose depending on what set bonuses you want, as well as what resistances you need. I love how big the game is. It's just huge. It's basically World, but much larger as far as I can tell, with 5 massive zones, each quite expansive and unique with their own distinct regions. The whole thing is also incredibly immersive. This is partially due to the fact that you can now freely come and go between towns, referred to as base camps, and the rest of the map with no loading. They've also built in this like realistic feeling ecosystem with a large variety of animals and their interactions with these prey and predator relationships. Again, there are the territory wars where 2 giant monsters will just like occasionally start fighting each other. The game's got seasons as it moves through this barren area, and then a transitional period, and then the season of plenty. And with those seasons not only come visual differences with massive storms rolling in and then abundant life after, but also different plants and animals will be in the region as it goes through these different seasons. And then on top of all of that, the game just has a ton of charm, like the Palico companions, all the different animal life in it, all the different characters that you meet, just a lot of quirk to it and a lot of fun and interesting attention to detail. Really just, again, super charming moments. There's so much charm into this series, and they've just continued to ramp it up with Wilds. Now, the game certainly has many issues, as we outlined in the first half of this video, but my overall thoughts haven't really much changed since the review. I still think this is a fantastic Monster Hunter strictly from the gameplay, world, systems, and features perspective. It's just a lot of fun for all the reasons I just outlined. But yes, at the same time, multiplayer is still annoyingly not as streamlined and simple as it should be. And yes, the game is a tad on the easy side, but biggest of all, the performance has been absolutely abysmal for a lot of people, seemingly quite a massive chunk of people, and that needs to be addressed. Because while my personal experience of playing the game, the performance was fine, again, at least to a point where I didn't notice it and it didn't impact my experience, it's still very obvious this is not the universal experience, and many people are reporting horrendous performance and that needs to be addressed by Capcom 100% as soon as possible, and not just by telling them to update their damn drivers, okay? Just fix your game because a lot of people are having a really hard time with it. That is all for today's video. Thank you as always. Let me know below how things have been going for you. If you've been playing Monster Hunter Wilds, are you one of those people who are having really bad performance like seemingly many people are? Did you get lucky? Are you like me where the performance is not bad, or at least it's not noticeable enough that you've been playing and enjoying it? And if you have, do you have other issues with the game as well? Interested what your all's experience has been. Let me know below. But that does it for today. Thank you as always for watching. Hope you enjoyed. I'll see y'all next time. Take it easy.